Why is it that the Steelers seem like they're not interested in making a splash at quarterback? Well, we got a report from The Athletic. Mike DeFabo, our guy we have on the show, he talked about it recently on Athletic. We bring him here on the show to talk about that. If the Diontae Johnson trade talks because of any drama that we're not aware of, and about the free agency pool that keeps growing. It's the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get your YouTube channel to get all your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. More on them later. We got Mike DeFabo in the house. Mike was out here doing the reporter business. By the way, we got to party it up during Combine Week. But when he got back, this man, I wouldn't say a bombshell, but you dropped a bit of a bomb. And I think there's a lot of people wondering, when are the Steelers going to make a move? And you kind of made a report in the Athletic talking about Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Justin Fields, none of the above. Can you explain to people what kind of went into what you found when you've been digging around?
Right, absolutely. So there's obviously been a lot of speculation and rumors and talk, and for good reason, because people wonder, what are they going to do with Kenny Pickett, and is he going to be their quarterback next season? So the three names you mentioned are the ones that people are throwing around most. And so one of the things I wanted to do at the Combine was talk with people and see where they're at in these discussions, see what their interest level was. And each of these three, I think, is in a different category. Kirk Cousins is a free agent at this point. And to land him, the Steelers would need to probably do a lot of salary cap gymnastics, move around some money, and also feel like they were willing to take a big swing on a guy who's on the other side of 35 and he's coming off an Achilles injury. And, based on what Dianna Russini, who's one of our national insiders, had heard, the Steelers were not one of the teams making a big play for him. And Adam Schefter later went on the Pat McAfee show and said also the same thing. He didn't expect them to be in play for Kirk Cousins. So we can pretty much rule out Kirk Cousins because of that. Then the one that I really heard about was Russell Wilson. And people were tying the Steelers to him because he's willing to work for as little as the veteran minimum, reportedly. And it would make sense for the Steelers that you could basically bring in a guy who's an established veteran in the league, use all that salary cap savings to surround him with talent. And the source that I talked with is familiar with the Steelers coaching staff and their feelings on Russell Wilson at this stage in his career. And this source was pretty emphatic to the point that I felt good going with this, that they did not think that the Steelers would target him. I think that there's a desire to see what they have in Kenny Pickett and to see what he looks like with Arthur Smith. And then the third and maybe the biggest thing is that Dianna Russini told me, and we reported collectively, that the Steelers are not among the teams that's aggressively pursuing Justin Fields. And what I mean by that is there are teams who have submitted offers, and there are teams that are very actively trying to land Justin Fields. I think that when Omar Khan said that he's considering every option, I think he's a man of his word, and he absolutely is talking with the Bears and figuring out what the price is. But at this point, there are teams that are just willing to pay more, and because of that, the Steelers are not a likely destination for him. So we will have to see how this all plays out. Things can change. I think that the biggest thing that could change here would be if the price just completely falls off the cliff for Justin Fields. If, let's say, for example, they land Kirk Cousins and all of a sudden Atlanta is not a viable option, or just the dominoes fall in such a way that all of a sudden the price falls on Fields. Maybe the Steelers come in with a very late offer. Maybe Omar Khan is pulling a con artist move and is going to sit around and wait. But as I sit here right now, I would not expect the Steelers to be in play for any of those quarterbacks.
This is where I've been for a while, Mike, that, it makes no sense unless the Steelers could get these guys for very little. Russell Wilson is the one I think that kind of contradicts that, because it wouldn't, he's getting released. It would cost you
Right.
nothing. He's getting released and getting paid like by the Broncos. So like, that's why he's like, I can take a vet minimum contract and play whoever I want. The Broncos are still paying me that money. So Russell Wilson is the one that's unique about that situation. Justin Fields would probably take a draft pick and you'd have to sign him to a 5th-year extension. Kirk Cousins would take a lot of money. Like there's options there, but Russell Wilson's the one. And I think that's another interesting part of your report. It's like, okay, but he's a veteran quarterback. He's won a Super Bowl. He's a guy that's been very good in the NFL at times. Wasn't great in Denver, but even in his not greatness in Denver, he was better than kind of what the Steelers had at quarterback. What do you see as the reason for this? Is it more about maybe just where Russ is in his career, or is it because, he's had a personality like at Denver? There were obvious divisions among the teams. Seattle, we've heard about from Marshawn Lynch and Richard Sherman that was a thing there too. Is it more about that, or is it more about just age and where he's at in his career?
I don't want to speak for the organization because, I don't know exactly what the reason is, but I think all those things play a factor here. The other thing is, you have to look at it like, yes, he's willing to play for the veteran minimum this year, but what about next year? And I think that the Steelers just aren't at a place right now where they would want the 1-year stopgap solution. Because if you bring in Russell Wilson, you say, yeah, he's cheap for a year. Well, number one, you're punting on Kenny Pickett. You're robbing yourself of that year that you could see what Kenny Pickett has. And then next season, what's Russell Wilson going to want in terms of money? So are you really, is this the long-term play? Like if the Steelers were much closer to winning a Super Bowl and Russell Wilson was a better quarterback at this stage in his career, maybe it would make sense. But I feel like he's not what he once was. You have to surround him with talent, and there's no guarantee that this one season is going to end with like a great playoff run. So why not give Kenny Pickett an opportunity to prove what he can do? That's the way that I see this situation. The other factor here is like, if you add all of them individually, you can dissect and be like, here's why Russell Wilson would or wouldn't make sense. Here's why Justin Fields might not make sense. Here's why Kirk Cousins might not make sense. But the fact that they're not really like making a major play for any of these guys, they're also not involved with Baker Mayfield. All these things together also suggest that they are kind of curious what Kenny Pickett can be with Arthur Smith. And I think that that's one of my big takeaways, is that there was so little noise around the Steelers and all these quarterbacks at the combine that to me, it lends more credence to Omar Khan's saying, I have full faith in Kenny Pickett. I take that comment now much more seriously than I did at the time.
I feel all of this, and this is kind of where I've been. If anyone's been watching this show, or just listen to me in general, I've been saying for a while they're not going for a splash, and also like they're trying to build a core where they can win. What they want to win at the line of scrimmage more consistently. They want to keep a great defense, and they want to get better on defense because they're having a lot of changing parts there. They're trying to still figure out who's going to be the core on offense. And I liken it to where the Chiefs were before they selected Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs had a lot of great pieces around their team, and they had Alex Smith at quarterback, and they were pretty good. They were a good team. They would earn buys into the playoffs. And I think the Steelers are trying to get to that point where they're everything but a star quarterback away from being able to be a serious threat to win the Super Bowl. Obviously, they can make the playoffs. They've done it 3 out of the last 4 times. Now, I think it's about putting everything together and getting that stronger roster with that young core that they're building right now. And to get that core, you need draft picks, you need money to sign the right free agents, and you need to take a few stabs here and there to figure out what's that best mix so that when you're ready at a year or two's time and you have everything up and everything's ready to go, then you can make your big play at quarterback. But it'd be different if this quarterback class had like 4 or 5 guys and you were in range to go get one, and you felt super confident that you had one of those guys. Like if this was the Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, that like draft class where there was like 4 or 5 guys everyone was talking about, I'd feel different. But like this is a year where it's 3 guys and they're going in the top 3 probably when you look at this draft class. So I think it makes a lot of sense for what the direction that they're going. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to ask Mike about the Diontae Johnson trade talk, because it's not from the Steelers, but there's a lot of speculation, and I want to get his perspective on what's causing a lot of this speculation. More on that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. But first, I want to remind you that this show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the #1 sportsbook in America. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets by winning any $5 bet on FanDuel. It's an app you can download right to your phone and play right away. If you're like me, football season being done doesn't mean I'm done with sports. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play with NBA, NHL, college basketball, and so much more action. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end up and get into this season and make sure you're getting your wins in, because you can make quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive prop bets, and so much more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. It's that simple. Just join FanDuel.com/LockedOn to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. We're going to dive back into this Diontae Johnson trade talk. I brought this up weeks ago that I thought it would make sense if the Steelers were to trade anybody. Diontae Johnson is the top target for that. Doesn't mean they're going to trade him. Doesn't mean they want to trade him. I said if they want to trade somebody and they're looking to get draft capital, Diontae Johnson is the carrot you could dangle out there. About a week before the combine, I get a call from a radio station, WGR in Buffalo, and I'm like, why do they want to talk to a Steelers guy? Okay, fine, I guess. And it was because they wanted to know what's the deal with Diontae Johnson? Do the Steelers want to trade him? And now, Mike, it's everybody's starting to talk about this. So Steelers could trade Diontae Johnson. Everyone's bringing this up. And there's some people that are like, from my perspective, it's not even about Diontae himself. It's about his contract situation. He's got 1 year left on his deal. He's a $15 million cap hit. You could free up $10 million if he's not on the roster. And if someone wants to give you a day 2 draft pick for him, that makes a lot of sense to get that instead of waiting until next year and maybe you get the third, the late third comp pick that you can get, or you can get a decent third round pick, or even maybe a second round pick if someone's desperate enough. But some people wonder, is it about maybe Diontae Johnson and any problems he might have with the organization? Maybe he's beefing with George Pickens, or there's a comment that he liked Mason Rudolph and everyone thinks that's the big deal. Where do you think this is more coming from, Mike? Is it just the contract situation, or do you think there's something else there?
In this situation, I don't want to speak for Diontae. And so for me, I feel like a lot of this is speculation. I don't know. I don't have any sources that are saying, yeah, he wants out of town. I don't have sources that are saying the Steelers are actively looking to move him. I think a lot of it is people connecting the dots. And for me, the reasons to trade him are exactly the things that you detailed. And, I know that there was some discord within the locker room offensively. I don't believe that Diontae is really like one of the sole culprits of the problem. I don't look at him and say, you absolutely must move this guy. He's a problem in the locker room. But I do think that if you are interested in changing some of the dynamics within the locker room, he would be the one with the movable contract because of all the reasons you detailed. So that's the way that I kind of look at this situation, and we'll have to see where it goes. I'll also say that if you get rid of Diontae Johnson in some way, you better replace him because, I like Calvin Austin. I think he has some promise, but because of his size, I don't know, exactly how or where he'll fit. Allen Robinson might come back next year in a reduced rate, but he's not going to replace Diontae Johnson. And I felt like we saw very well what happens to this team when you don't have that guy who can work the underneath routes and free up George Pickens to go deep. And so, if they were to make a move like this, I would think they would also need to, let's say you get a third round pick back, you would need to use that third round pick to get a wide receiver to replace him, or you would need to go out and get somebody in free agency. I just don't think removing an offensive player right now from an offense that was so abysmal last year is probably not the wisest move if you don't have a succession plan and something in place that you feel like is going to be a guy that come in and take his place.
You're absolutely right about that. The Steelers are in a position where this can't just be like, he's off the team, everything's solved, and they got to make sure that whoever they replace his spot with on the depth chart, it's got to be a talented guy. And there's talks about, maybe they get Tyler Boyd in free agency, but even a Tyler Boyd in free agency wouldn't be what Diontae Johnson is. And that's the other thing I say this all the time about Diontae Johnson is that, this guy's talented. If he had come during prime Ben Roethlisberger days, this guy would be a regular Pro Bowl wide receiver with the way that he gets open, the way that he makes plays. He's shifty in the field. If he could just have that top tier quarterback play, he would be a whole different threat, which is
Well,
why
he was a Pro Bowler when Ben was here. That's exactly.
Right. Exactly. And that's my point, is that if he had that instead of his rookie year was Devlin Hodges' year,
Right.
like 2020 was the one year that he got that. 2021 was old version of Ben. 2022 and 2023 were either Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, or Mason Rudolph, and he hasn't had that chance to really take off. And I think that's kind of where some Steelers fans see him at. But I think there's enough NFL people out there that see, like, hey, that dude's really talented. If I'm the Bills, if I'm the Chiefs, if I'm like the Texans, if I got my quarterback and I'm trying to make a splash move to say we're Super Bowl contenders next year, Deontay Johnson is certainly a target that they can look at, who would be a veteran, come in. You don't have to worry about them warming up to the NFL like a lot of the rookies. It makes a lot of sense. The question will be, what kind of compensation could they get back from this that would be worth losing Deontay Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anything above a third round pick or around a third round pick, I think that I would consider in that situation, just because of the fact that he's on in the expiring deal.
Right.
And the other thing that I've thought about here is Omar Khan is really good with the numbers, and wide receiver salaries have skyrocketed in recent years. So there's more value now than ever to having a wide receiver on a rookie contract. So if you were able to trade a wide receiver and then backfill that position with a younger guy, I think that could be an intriguing way to manipulate the money and to get more value out of a position.
I'm right with you on this. That's a very good point. That I think what a lot of teams try to do at wide receiver, most teams, they try to get one star receiver that they're paying their contract, and then around them is just smaller vets that they pay money to, and rookie and guys on rookie deals that don't cost too much. Because and that's where the Steelers, another reason why they're not keeping Diontae Johnson past this year. If they have plans with George Pickens, they got to sign George Pickens in a year or two here. And if they do that, you can't do that and be paying Diontae Johnson and be paying this defense that you're trying to put together, and keep some of the veterans that you're going to want to keep that you've been developing on offense. So it comes down to some tough decisions. And if you feel like George Pickens is a future wide receiver one, Diontae Johnson's got to go. But I also think the benefit here is, Mike, this is a very good draft class for wide receivers. There's guys you can get in the second, third, and fourth rounds who could be starters in the NFL, legitimately. Not hey, project down the road, but like guys, people looking like Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. That dude could be for real. There's all sorts of guys you go down the list. I think that's another position that the Steelers are in, is if they traded away Diontae and they got, say, a day 3 pick, a third or a second round pick, then all of a sudden you have a first, you have a second, you have maybe 2/3 and 2/4. That's a lot of chances to get the wide receiver you really want in this draft class to be the next, to be like George Pickens number 2. You could bring back Allen Robinson, you can sign a Tyler Boyd, and you can and you still got Calvin Austin developing. That's a good option at a receiving core. But the question is still, would all of that still work when you're trying to still figure out what this new offense is going to look like? And Diontae Johnson is one of the best route runners in football.
Right, definitely. You have to have a contingency plan there, somebody to replace him. The other thing I think that is interesting to think about is it's a new front office. And Andy Weidel, when he was in Philadelphia, yes, they very much had a philosophy. They wanted to build through the trenches. They built one of the best offensive lines in football. They had a fantastic defensive line that just came at you in waves. But the other thing they did was numerous times in recent years, they either drafted a first-round wide receiver or they used a first-round pick in a trade for a wide receiver. So I wonder, traditionally the Steelers were more of a team that was really good at evaluating wide receivers. They had a Hall of Fame quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger who could highlight them and maximize their potential. They were content to sit around and find the diamonds in the rough that people overlooked, like Diontae Johnson, But now with the new front office, will there be a bit of a different philosophy? And that's I still believe that their biggest needs are, on the offensive line and cornerback position. But if they fall in love with a certain wide receiver, will the new thinking from the front office maybe change the way that they go about things?
Certainly. That's a very big question that we'll see, and we'll probably revisit a few times before we get to draft day, because it could also be a draft day trade. I brought this up on the Tuesday show, but like you think back to, A.J. Brown, one of those examples you brought up, that he was a big guy for the Tennessee Titans. They traded for him on draft day. Randy Moss was a draft day trade pick. The Steelers have sent away Martavis Bryant on draft day. It's not something unheard of, and I think it could be something to watch moving forward that the Steelers take a step on. But free agency is around the corner. We'll talk about some of the best options there at free agency right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Motors, Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. Let's talk about some free agency options. Now, I said this for weeks because people kept calling into the Locked On Steelers hotline. We'll get back to that. We just have had a lot to talk about with the combine, so sorry for all those who are calling in and not getting on the show right now, but we got to knock out a lot of topics. But a lot of people keep calling, what about this guy in free agency? What about that guy in free agency? I'm like, guys, the free agency pool is far from set in February. We're even here. It's March 5th that we are recording this podcast right now, and today, it shrunk, it grew, it shrunk, it grew because people are signing and franchise tagging. They're also cutting, and guys keep coming open. And now it continues to look, we continue to look at like, okay, who's really available? Like, for example, if you wanted a cornerback in this, a lot of people said, ooh, just get Jalen Johnson or Jerry Sneed. It'll be that easy. Well, both have been franchise tagged. Now, do you want to trade for them? That's another story. But these things are changing here. Mike, if you see the Steelers being big players at any position in free agency, what do you think is the most likely? And is there a name or two that you've had on your mind?
Well, I look at center position right now because this in the draft, this may be one of the best years to be looking for a center because our draft analyst, Dane Brugler, believes as many as 3 centers could go in the first round. There's Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. There's Graham Barton from Duke. And then the guy that I really am a big fan of, Zach Frazier from West Virginia. But after cutting Mason Cole, do the Steelers really want to go into the draft feeling like we absolutely need a center? And if we don't, we're going to be in a bad spot. So that's where I feel like maybe they double up here, where they sign a guy, a veteran center, and then they also draft a center. Maybe you start him at guard and move him over to center after the first year or so. But there's a number of really, I think, reasonable targets here for the centers. On our big board right now, the top center is Lloyd Cushenberry from the Broncos. There's also from the Rams, Coleman Shelton, I think would be interesting. And then further down our list, we have Aaron Brewer, who was on the Titans and has obviously worked with Arthur Smith. I think those guys have a good relationship. I think any name that is tied to Arthur Smith, I think you could start to think maybe that would make some sense. So from the center position, I like that. We got to give people some quarterbacks to think about. I think Ryan Tannehill is very interesting if the Steelers don't get Mason Rudolph. I'm not sure if Mason decides to come back, maybe that falls apart. But I'm really intrigued by the possibility of Tannehill coming here. I think that would make sense on a number of levels. And then I think linebacker, like Omar Khan talked about how they left Latrobe feeling like they did a great job of building quality depth and they loved their inside linebacker position. But those best laid plans fell apart when, Cole Holcomb and Quan Alexander got injured. Right now, there's no guarantee that Cole Holcomb is going to be back by week 1. I know that's his target and it's his hope, but they don't know that he will. So, I love the idea of Devin White, for example. Remember a couple years back when they got Devin Bush, everyone was talking about the two Devons and which one was going to fall to the Steelers, that they were going to finally fix their inside linebacker position. Well, now a few years later, Devin White's not going to completely fix things, but I do like what he brings to the table. And I think if you add an inside linebacker at a minimum in free agency, then you can add another one in the draft and you can round out that room.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense at linebacker. I want to revisit center real quick because, like you said, there's centers in this draft class that they can like, that they have good tape, and people feel excited about. But like you said, the Steelers, I mean, last year they traded up to get Broderick Jones. It took until like week 10 before he became the solidified starter. They loved Joey Porter Jr. It took him a while before he became a starter. I hear you out on like would they spend a high pick at center and then just start him right away? I think the guy that did that was Marquise Pouncey, and I'm not sure if there's a Marquise Pouncey in this draft class. There's good centers, but Marquise Pouncey was like a several-time All-Pro, best in the league type center guy. And I'm not sure that these guys are that. They're very good players who could be Pro Bowl guys and big players for the Steelers into the future. But I just think you have to be really careful when you're the Steelers and you're making moves like that, because in this scenario, let's say they get a free agent that they're paying decent money to. Are you going to pay decent money to a free agent and draft tight center again? No, you're not. You're probably going to go somewhere else, like offensive tackle. So center is an interesting spot there. Corner is the other interesting spot there. Talking about veterans and everything that they could get there. There's certain guys like I think Darius, I want to say Williams, from the Jaguars, got cut yesterday, and he's a big name that's been added to it. I'm not sure how he fits because he's a shorter corner that doesn't play in the slot. The Steelers have been going for longer corner guys, but at the same time, he had 15 breakups in 2 straight years, and he's been playing really, really well. I wonder if center makes a lot of sense, but if there was another position where they could make a splash at, and not a splash, not like $20 million or anything like that, but get a solid starter veteran that people would be excited about, like they were with Isaac Seumalo last year. I wonder if cornerback is that position this year.
Yeah, I hear you. And you know what I like about that is that the Steelers historically had a very hard time drafting and developing corners, but they had very good success when it came to just paying free agent corners. Like of the positions, I think that they went out and got in free agency, we saw it time and again, that they were able to do that. So I kind of like the idea of, if you're going to have a young corner in Joey Porter Jr., who showed great things last year, I think is going to be a great player in this league, but is inevitably going to go through growing pains in his second season. I like the idea of having a more veteran guy on the opposite side, so that you're not breaking in 2 new young corners at the same time. So I actually am a very big fan of that idea of going and getting a corner like that. Or you could go get like, a nickel in that mold. Keyshawn Nixon,
Packers,
play with the Packers last year. He would be a great nickel. And as much as the Steelers played nickel and dime in their sub packages, like, that's a very important position in their defense, and I feel like it's one that they could upgrade.
It certainly would be helpful. It would give them a lot more flexibility in the secondary. So I definitely hear you on that. I look around and I continue to see options for the Steelers to fill certain positions. Last thing here, going back to linebacker,
Sure.
you were talking about options there. You brought up Devin White. I like the idea of a Devin White, but there's also guys, they just added Jerome Baker because the Dolphins cut him, so he's into the pool. You also have guys like Blake Cashman, who could be in there. The big name is definitely Patrick Queen with his time with the Ravens, but I kind of hear you on the idea of, hey, get a decent veteran and then maybe draft a guy in the middle rounds, and then you can still have that well-rounded room of linebackers as long as Cole Holcomb can come back healthy, but you're not pressed for Cole Holcomb come back healthy because you've signed and drafted a guy and you still have a Landon Roberts.
Yeah, so typically, like the last couple of years, they've relied on a 3-man rotation. So, I don't know. I imagine because Quan Alexander tore his Achilles, I would not sign a guy coming off of a torn Achilles. I don't imagine he would be in their plans. I don't know that for certain, but you're going to need to replace at least one. And then if Cole Holcomb's not ready, so if you got a guy in free agency, then you're rounding out that room. Now you're back to having 3 guys. You've got free agency in the draft. I think that would be a really wise way to go.
Absolutely. There's a lot of different directions they can go. We'll be covering it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks again, Mike, for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter. I keep it easy. It's just at Mike DeFabo, and you can read all my work in The Athletic.
Absolutely. Check him out, The Athletic. A lot of great work there. Thanks again, Mike. And thank you all for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. And find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. We'll see you again Thursday for more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.